I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American guest walked up holding his phone like it was broken. He looked genuinely concerned. He said his weather app was showing the temperature as 18 degrees, but it felt warm outside. He asked if something was wrong with his phone, or if maybe the Netherlands had different air quality that made cold temperatures feel hot. I stared at him for a second, then I realized he didn't know about Celsius. I explained that 18 Celsius is about 64 Fahrenheit. He looked at me like I'd just invented a new language. Most people would stop there, but I track this stuff full-time. The quiet logic gaps that appear when American thinking meets the rest of the world? That's what this channel decodes every week. If you get why that matters, you already belong here. He said, "So you guys just use different numbers for temperature?" Yes, we do. The entire rest of the world does. Another guest that same week asked why the wall outlets looked weird. I told him they were European plugs. He said, "But why would Europe use different plugs?" I didn't know how to answer that. I just said, "Because we do." He then asked if he could buy an adapter that would make his American plug work here, but also make the electricity less powerful because he'd heard European electricity was stronger. I explained voltage converters exist, but that his phone charger would handle it fine. He wasn't convinced. He said he didn't want his phone to explode from too much power. I assured him it wouldn't. He plugged it in while standing as far away as the cord allowed, like he was defusing a bomb. Then there was the guy who got upset that we didn't have ice in the drinks. He said, "How do you keep them cold?" I said, "We refrigerate them." He said, "But without ice, how do I know it's cold?" I handed him the glass. He touched it. He admitted it was cold, but he still wasn't happy. He said it didn't feel like a real cold drink without ice clinking around in it. He asked if we had a bag of ice he could buy. We didn't. He left a review online later saying the hotel refused to provide ice and that it was suspicious. I've worked in tourism for 6 years. I've seen a lot. But American logic abroad is its own category. It's not that Americans are bad travelers. Most are fine. But when the logic breaks, it breaks hard. And it's always the same pattern. Something works differently than it does in America. The American assumes either the system is broken, or that physics works differently here, or that everyone else is doing it wrong. It never occurs to them that maybe, just maybe, America is the outlier. And that's where the stories get interesting. Most channels give you travel fails. I give you frameworks, the psychology behind why systems clash, and how people adapt. If that difference clicks with you, make sure you're here for the next breakdown, because once that logic wall hits, anything can happen. I have a friend who worked at a car rental place in Dublin. An American couple came in to pick up their reserved car. They did the paperwork, got the keys, walked outside to the lot. 5 minutes later, they came back inside. The man said, "We can't find the driver's seat." My friend was confused. He walked out with them. The car was right there. He opened the door. The steering wheel was on the right side. The man said, "No, the driver's seat, where the wheel is." My friend said, "That is the driver's seat." The man stared. Then he said, "But the wheel is on the wrong side." My friend explained that in Ireland, you drive on the left side of the road, so the steering wheel is on the right side of the car. The man processed this. Then he asked, "But how do you reach the pedals from over there?" My friend didn't understand the question. The woman clarified. She thought the pedals stayed on the left side, but the wheel moved to the right, so you'd have to stretch across the car to drive. My friend had to physically show them that the pedals move with the driver's seat. They looked embarrassed. They took the car. They returned it 3 hours later and asked for a refund because the car felt backward. My cousin worked at a train station in Brussels. An American man approached the ticket counter and said he needed to get to Paris, but he didn't understand why the tickets were so cheap. He thought maybe they were weekly passes or something. My cousin said no, it's just a one-way ticket to Paris. The man said, but it's only 29 euros. Paris is in a whole other country. My cousin said yes, that's how trains work in Europe. The man couldn't wrap his head around it. He said, in the US, if I want to go to another state, I have to fly or drive for hours, and it costs way more than $29. My cousin explained that Europe is smaller and trains are faster and more common here. The man said, so you're telling me I can just get on a train and be in France in an hour? Yes. He bought the ticket but looked suspicious the whole time, like it was a scam. I was a tour guide in Rome for a summer. An American woman in my group asked how old the Colosseum was. I told her it was nearly 2,000 years old. She went silent. Then she said, but America is only like 250 years old. I said, yes. She said, so this building is older than my entire country? I said, yes, by a lot. She looked at the Colosseum like it had personally offended her. Then she asked, did they have electricity back then? I said no. She said, then how did they see at night? I explained they used torches and oil lamps. She thought about it. Then she said, but how did they build it without power tools? I explained they used manual labor and engineering techniques. She said, that doesn't make sense. It's too big. I didn't know how to respond. She spent the rest of the tour trying to figure out if the Colosseum was fake or rebuilt later with modern tools. She wasn't joking. A bartender in London told me about an American who ordered a pint of beer. When it arrived, the man looked confused. He said, this isn't cold. The bartender said it was stored at cellar temperature, which is traditional for certain beers. The man said, but beer is supposed to be cold, like freezing cold. The bartender explained that in the UK, ales and bitters are often served warmer to bring out the flavor. The man didn't accept this. He said, if it's not cold, it's not beer. He asked if they had Budweiser. They didn't. He asked if they could put ice in the beer. The bartender said no. The man left the beer untouched and ordered a Coke instead. Then he complained that the Coke was also warm. The bartender explained they don't fill drinks with ice by default. The man said, what kind of country doesn't put ice in drinks? The bartender said, this one. My sister worked at a pharmacy in Copenhagen. An American woman came in looking panicked. She said she needed Tylenol. My sister pointed to the pain reliever section. The woman said, no, I need Tylenol, not some European knockoff. My sister explained that Tylenol is just a brand name for acetaminophen, which is the same active ingredient in the European version. The woman didn't believe her. She said, but it's not called Tylenol, so how do I know it's the same? My sister showed her the ingredient label. It was identical. The woman squinted at it. Then she said, but why would you call it something different? My sister said, because it's made by a different company here. The woman bought it, but said she didn't feel safe taking it. She threw it away and waited until she got home to the US to take pain medicine. She had a headache for 4 more days. I worked at a cafe in Vienna. An American tourist came in and sat down at a table. He waited and waited. After about 10 minutes, he flagged me down and said, is anyone going to take my order? I said, you have to order at the counter. He looked offended. He said, but I'm sitting at a table. I said, yes, but this isn't table service unless you're ordering food. He said, in America, when you sit at a table, someone comes to you. I said, this isn't America. He got up, ordered at the counter, and then asked why we didn't bring the coffee to him. I explained he had to wait at the counter or we'd call his number. He said, "This is so inefficient." I didn't argue. He left without tipping because, in his words, I had to do all the work myself. That same cafe had another incident a week later. A different American asked why everyone was so quiet. It was mid-afternoon. People were reading, working on laptops, having quiet conversations. He said, "It feels like a library in here." I said, "People prefer it calm." He said, "But it's a cafe. Cafes are supposed to be social." I explained that in Vienna, cafes are places to relax, think, work. Loud talking is considered rude. He didn't get it. He said, "So you're telling me I can't even have a normal conversation?" I said he could, just at a lower volume. He tried. He lasted about 5 minutes before his voice rose again. 3 people glared at him. He noticed. He left early and told his friend outside. Europeans are so uptight. A German colleague told me about hosting an American exchange student. The student arrived at his apartment and immediately walked in wearing shoes. My colleague asked him to take them off. The student looked confused. He said, "Why?" My colleague said, "Because we don't wear shoes indoors." The student said, "But the floor is hard. I need shoes for support." My colleague offered him slippers. The student said, "I don't wear other people's slippers. That's gross." My colleague said, "Then just wear socks." The student said, "But what if I need to leave quickly?" My colleague didn't understand that logic. The student reluctantly took off his shoes, but complained the entire 3 months he stayed there. He said it felt like living in a doctor's office. I was on a train in Switzerland. An American man nearby was talking loudly on his phone. Everyone in the car was glancing at him. In Switzerland, being loud on public transport is extremely frowned upon. After about 5 minutes, an older Swiss woman politely asked him to lower his voice. He said, "I'm not even being that loud." She said, "You're louder than everyone else here." He looked around. He realized she was right. But instead of apologizing, he said, "Well, maybe everyone else is too quiet." The woman didn't respond. She just moved to another car. The man continued his call at the same volume. At the next stop, a conductor came by and asked him to either end the call or move to the vestibule area between cars. The man was shocked. He said, "Is talking on the phone illegal here?" The conductor said no, but disturbing others is inconsiderate. The man hung up and muttered, "Europe is so controlling." My friend managed a small hotel in Barcelona. An American couple checked in late at night. Around 11 p.m., they started watching TV at full volume. Within 15 minutes, my friend received 3 noise complaints. He called their room and politely asked them to turn it down, because the walls are thin, and quiet hours start at 10 p.m. The man who answered said, "It's not even midnight yet." My friend explained that in Spain and most of Europe, 10 p.m. is considered late in residential areas. The man said, "In the U.S., quiet hours don't start until like 2 a.m. My friend said, "This isn't the U.S. The man turned the volume down slightly but then asked, "Are Spanish people just really light sleepers or something?" My friend didn't know how to answer that. The next morning, the couple complained at checkout that the hotel was too strict about noise and left a 2-star review. A waiter in Paris told me about an American diner who snapped his fingers to get attention. In France, snapping at service staff is seen as demeaning. The waiter ignored him. The man snapped again. The waiter still ignored him. Finally, the man stood up and walked over and said, "I've been trying to get your attention." The waiter calmly said, "I saw you, but I don't respond to snapping." The man was confused. He said, "How else am I supposed to get your attention?" The waiter said, "You can raise your hand politely, make eye contact, or say, 'Excusez-moi.'" The man said, "That takes too long." The waiter said, "Then you'll wait longer. The man sat back down, visibly annoyed. When the check came, he didn't tip. He told his companion, "French service is so slow and rude." The waiter overheard and said nothing. He'd heard it 100 times before. I worked at a gas station outside Munich. An American couple pulled up in a rental car, confused about how to pump gas. The man got out and stared at the pump. He said, "How much is gas here?" I said, "About 1.60 per liter." He said, "Per liter? What's that in gallons?" I did the math in my head. I said, "About €6 per gallon." He looked horrified. He said, "That's insane. Gas is like $3 a gallon back home." I explained that Europe has higher fuel taxes and smaller cars that use less gas. He wasn't comforted. Then he asked, "How do I know when to stop pumping?" I said, "The pump stops automatically." He said, "But how many liters do I need?" I said, "However much fits in your tank." He filled up the car but spent the whole time muttering about liters and doing mental conversions on his phone. A friend who worked at a hardware store in Oslo told me an American asked for a 2x4. My friend asked, "2x4 what?" The American said, "A 2x4. You know, lumber." My friend didn't recognize the term. The American explained it's a piece of wood that's 2 inches by 4 inches. My friend said, "We use centimeters here." The American said, "Okay, so what's 2 inches in centimeters?" My friend said, "About 5 centimeters." The American said, "So I need a 5x10? My friend said, "We don't stock sizes by inches." "What do you need it for?" The American explained his project. My friend recommended a piece of wood by its metric dimensions. The American bought it, but later returned it, saying it felt wrong because he couldn't convert it back to inches in his head. I was helping an American tourist navigate a bus route in Stockholm. She was staring at her phone, frustrated. She said, "This map says the bus station is 500 meters away. How far is that?" I said, "About a 5-minute walk." She said, "But how many feet?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe 1,600 feet?" She said, "That doesn't help. Can you just tell me how far it is?" I said, "It's close. You can see it from here." I pointed. She looked. She said, "Oh." Then she asked, "Why don't you guys just use miles?" I said, "Because we use kilometers." She said, "But miles are easier." I said, "Not if you didn't grow up with them." She thought about that. Then she said, "I guess that makes sense, but it's still annoying." A co-worker in Belgium told me about an American who came into the office and asked what the date was. My co-worker said, "It's the 8th of March." The American wrote it down as 8-3. My co-worker glanced at the paper and said, "That's wrong." The American said, "What do you mean? It's March 8th." My co-worker said, "Yes, but here we write day, month, year, not month, day, year." The American looked at the paper. He said, "That's so confusing. Why would you put the day first?" My coworker said, "Because it's smaller to larger. Day, then month, then year." The American said, "But in the US, we put the month first because you say March 8th, not 8th of March." My coworker said, "We do say 8th of March." The American didn't have a response. He rewrote it correctly, but said it felt backward. I was at a doctor's office in Amsterdam when an American patient came in for a checkup. The nurse asked him to step on the scale. It read 88 kilograms. He looked down and panicked. He said, "88? I've gained so much weight." The nurse said, "No, that's 88 kilograms. That's about 194 pounds. He was relieved, then confused. He said, "Why don't you just use pounds?" The nurse said, "Because we use the metric system." He said, "But everyone knows pounds." She said, "Not here." Later, his blood pressure was fine. But when the doctor said his height was 182 centimeters, he had no idea if that was tall or short. The doctor said, "That's about 6 feet." He said, "Oh, okay. Why didn't you just say that?" The doctor said, Because I'm not American. My brother visited me in Prague. We went to a restaurant. The menu listed temperatures for steaks. He saw 55 degrees next to medium rare. He said, 55 degrees? That's freezing. They serve frozen steak here? I said, that's Celsius. He said, so what is it in Fahrenheit? I said, about 130. He said, that's way too low. Steak should be at least 145. I explained that internal cooking temperatures differ, but also that 55 degrees is correct for medium rare. He didn't trust it. He ordered his steak well done just to be safe. When it arrived, he said it was overcooked. I said, because you ordered it well done. He said, I had to. I didn't understand the temperature. I was at the airport in Lisbon, working the help desk, when an American man approached me looking stressed. He said his flight was delayed and he didn't understand the announcements because they were in Portuguese. I explained that the screen showed all the updates in English as well. He said, but why is the announcement in Portuguese first? I said, because we're in Portugal. He paused. Then he said, but isn't English the universal language? I said, not in Portugal. He seemed frustrated. He said, this would never happen in America. I said, you're right. In America, the announcements would be in English. He didn't catch the irony. He walked away, still annoyed. That interaction stuck with me. Not because it was outrageous, but because it's so common. American logic doesn't collapse because Americans are stubborn or ignorant. It collapses because the logic is built entirely around one system, one way of doing things. And when that system doesn't apply, the foundation cracks. Miles, Fahrenheit, dollars, month, day, year, ice in every drink, shoes indoors, tipping for everything, loud conversations, personal space, same-day delivery, free refills. These aren't universal truths. They're just American norms. But when you grow up in a country that refers to itself as the greatest nation on earth, it's easy to assume your way is the default. It's not malicious. It's just insulated. The funny thing is, most Americans adapt once they realize the difference. They laugh at themselves. They ask questions. They try. But that first moment of collapse, the moment when the math doesn't work, or the temperature doesn't make sense, or the system feels backward, that's when the logic breaks. And that's where the stories come from. Not from cruelty, but from surprise. From the shock of realizing that the rest of the world has been doing things differently this whole time, and it works just fine. I've collected these stories for years. From colleagues, from travelers, from strangers at train stations and coffee shops. And they never stop, because the world is big, and America is just one part of it. And every time someone crosses that border, literally or mentally, there's a chance the logic will collapse. Sometimes it's about temperature. Sometimes it's about trains. Sometimes it's about ice. But it always follows the same pattern: confusion, denial, frustration, and finally, hopefully, understanding. Or at least acceptance. And honestly, that's the best part. Not the collapse itself, but what comes after. The moment when someone realizes the world is bigger and stranger and more interesting than they thought. That's when the real travel begins. I unpack these logic collisions every week. How small habits expose whole world views. If you've stayed with me this far, subscribing isn't about supporting me, it's about never missing that next moment of perspective shift.